We've got everybody in that's coming in. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay and see okay? You should be seeing the screen I'm sharing with the PowerPoint. Okay, good. So what I'd like to do first, well, just to introduce myself for those of you that don't know me personally yet, Karli Spahr with OneTrust Home Loans and the Spahr team. And I do mortgages. That is my thing. What I want to do is I'm just trying to give back to you guys and give you a little bit of something to work with to go into especially into the busy season that is starting to ramp up a little bit. And what I'd like to do just to start is go through a quick presentation, just the market update. I was doing them more often, and with how much things are changing, I felt that it just was repetitive motion. So trying to do this a little less often and get into the nitty gritty of things. So again, if you can just throw in the chat if there's any questions or anything you want me to stop along the way, just let me know. So we'll start at the beginning, and hopefully my internet is going to cooperate. Okay, so one quote that I found, and I'm kind of big on quotes, but I thought it was really fitting. This one from Steve Jobs: deciding what not to do is as important as deciding what to do. And I think I've often fall in that category of, you want to do it all. You want to try the next best shiny thing. And it sometimes is just simplifying, going back to the basics, and getting those perfected before you add other things in. And organization, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, is a big piece of that. So let's just get into market update. And so I just want to talk about the 30-year fixed rate. Right now, you probably heard in the news, because the news is always telling you the good, but not the bad, that rates took a significant nosedive, and they did. They came down. However, we've seen them bounce back a little bit in the last couple of days. So keep that in mind. With the ups come the downs and vice versa. So we're seeing this up and down motion constantly based on data that's coming through. But the good news is we saw a nice decline, and some borrowers were seeing below 6%. All right, so mortgage purchase applications, not a big surprise. Following that is we were up the second week of the year, purchase applications up 25% year over year, which is really good to see. I'm sorry, month over month. And if you look where I have the arrow pointing here, you can see that as the rates are coming down, so is mortgage purchase applications, and that's very normal. When you see it rising, it goes the opposite direction. So we're heading into a good time of year for this to happen. Inflation, we have seen the 6th straight month in a row of inflation decline. So we're at 6.5% year for the end of the year inflation numbers, which was far lower than what we were at early in the year, as high as 9.2%, I believe. And another strange happening, and this is what's causing this up and down motion, is the opposite reactions that are happening in the marketplace in terms of numbers. So jobless claims was a big miss, and initial jobless claims, so these are people filing unemployment for the first time, came in at 15,000 lower, and we expected it to be 24,000 increase, and we actually dropped 15,000. So it was a drastic change. And we are seeing the ramifications of that. So why this is happening yet, I don't know. If just things have not trickled through yet from the holidays, because you have to remember when we're getting data from the government, it's always lagging. So we might start to see this come in line here shortly. Not again that we want to see unemployment numbers, but it doesn't make as much sense. Although I'll talk about it in a minute, but it's not a bad thing in terms of, you know, the recession that we may be bound and determined to go through. So the PPI, I've talked about this before, but the producer price index talks about what suppliers, what the finished goods are, right? So what the suppliers are charging to get it to the street. So producer price index decreased by 0.5%, and we were expecting it to decrease by only 0.1%. So that was a big win for the market. Also, what caused that rate decline last week. So it brought the year-over-year number down to 6.2%. Retail sales saw another huge decline in December. So these are always lagging numbers. You know, we're into January, we got the December numbers, was down 1.1%. Last month was down again. So we've seen out of the last 6 months, you've seen 4 out of the last 6 that were down. So definitely a trend there. Also a trend that's a little scary that we're seeing, but also talks about the recession that we're heading into. Credit card usage, when you see that increasing pretty tremendously, it's because people are starting to feel the pressure. They're still spending. They haven't slowed down the spending as much, which is some of the numbers that we're seeing, right? But they're using credit to pay for things. So they're depending on these things more heavily. And eventually that credit is going to no longer be available to them. They're not going to be able to afford the payments because interest rates have also gone up on credit cards. So something that you tend to see in a recessionary period. All right, so I found this really cool article as I was going through numbers, and one thing that really puts it into perspective, not that you guys don't already feel this, but the mortgage interest rates have risen the fastest than they have since the early 80s. And if you remember, you know, maybe none of us are old enough to remember this, but our parents sure talked about it, our grandparents, rates being in the, you know, high teens and 20s for mortgage rates and in the 80s. But what we've seen here is rates were in the 3s, and they have more than doubled into, you know, as high as 7% in early November. So that was the fastest increase that we've seen since the early 80s. And that's part of why it was so difficult to get people to want to buy, because they just couldn't. It shrunk their buying power. So what is it going to take to get more mortgage ready buyers? So mortgage ready potential home buyers are considered to be people that don't have a mortgage right now. So they're looking at specific characteristics in this chart. Credit scores of 661 and above, no foreclosures or bankruptcies in the last 7 years, no delinquencies in the last 12 months, no severe delinquencies, and 45 years or younger, with a back-end debt ratio that's less than 25% without housing, okay? So when you look at this on the chart, you can see that these are the millions of Americans that fall into these categories. So you've got 200, 300, 400, 500, and $600,000 mortgage loan amounts. And then when you look at the bottom of this graph, you see rates from 3 to 8%, and you can see how their buying power, you know, the number of people that can afford to buy shrinks as the rates go up. So one thing I want to point out is when you look at the 6% range, which is, you know, kind of where we're hanging right now, you are seeing the buying power, and this is probably the biggest buying power group, is that 300,000. That's a pretty large amount of first-time buyers in that range, at least in the Twin Cities. I know other markets are a little smaller than that, but just to put it in perspective, when it's at 6%, you're just a hair less than 25 million Americans. This is nationwide, right? That could potentially qualify for a mortgage. But when you lower the interest rate to 5%, it goes from 18 million up to, I don't know, 27 million. So you see the sharpest increase in this category than you do in the higher categories. So I feel like as we continue to see rates decline, we're going to see this open up. And we just, obviously, housing shortage is an issue too. But hopefully this is going to open up for move-up buyers to be able to afford to move and change. And one thing I want to point out with move-up buyers is to, you're looking to list their house. Obviously, you want to put that on the market. You want to create more inventory, but there's ways to talk to these sellers to help them understand that, hey, it's not all just about the mortgage rate and the mortgage payment. It's about how are you going to better yourself going into the next mortgage. So maybe they have some debt that they need to pay off, and they can do that by selling their house, pulling some of that equity, paying off debt, so that when they get into the next payment, their overall payment is not that much different. And when rates go down in the future, I know I've said this before, but we offer the no lender fee refinance. If they refinance with us before the end of 24, they can capitalize and probably end up with lower payments. And I'm working with several right now where we're creating strategies to help them be able to move up, and it's going to put another house in the market so that we can help another first-time home buyer get into a home. So just some strategies to think about when you're talking to people to help them think outside the box instead of, oh gosh, I'm giving up my 2.75 or 2.8 interest rate to go to 6 or 5 3/4 or whatever the rate is. It's not just about that. It's about the total financial picture. How can we put them in a better position? So I just want to point that out. All right. So the next slide is talking about inventory of homes for sale. And I know you're not all in the Twin Cities market, but I looked around and most markets are fairly similar. And this really ties into the last slide. So when you look at the price range here of inventory change that we saw, 350 to 500,000 has increased by 28%. That's huge. So that was the biggest increase that we saw overall. And then the 500,000, of course, it's not surprising when you see the big ones are sitting there a little bit more because they're not selling. But it's nice to see that we have this price range increasing. Okay. And the biggest category, at least in the Twin Cities, is townhomes that we're seeing the increase on. So, which is good for first-time home buyers.